Thanks a lot, everybody. So thanks a lot for hanging in there today for everything that's gone on. So I just wanted to come today, like the others, being a long-standing member of BHS, and I've been in the shoes of the early career hydrologist. So I thought I'd come and just tell you a bit about kind of what I've done over the last 15 or so years. And, you know, I think it's important to bear in mind that the climate is definitely changing, the weather is definitely changing, and as a result, hydrology is really important in dealing with the climate emergency that we're in. So hopefully I can just show you some of the exciting things that I've done and maybe give you some ideas of things you might like to do. So I was just going to share two things really today. So I'm going to have a little canter through my career. I'm just reminding myself about time, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. And then if we've got time, I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of the innovation we're doing in Scotland around hydrometric measurement. So for today, I'm going to start my journey around 2005. Like most good stories, I met a girl. She didn't live where I lived. I was working at Leeds University and I was going to move, so I started looking for jobs. So again, in common with most of the other presenters, I maybe fell a bit into hydrology. I was a kind of geologist running a research lab at the time and wanted something different. So I started looking into hydrology and I found some really interesting jobs and spoke to a few companies, and I ended up in the Environment Agency. So the journey I'm sharing starts as a flood forecasting team member, was the snappy title for that one. So joined the Environment Agency in 2006. And to start off with, although this might not sound particularly hydrology related, my focus was around supporting the duty officers that ran the flood warning and the flood forecasting services. So that was like making sure they had all the kit, the guidance, the manuals that they needed, developing simple tools that they could use to understand kind of how big an event is, how rare an event is, what happens next, how to schedule the flood forecast they were going to make and keep an eye on what was happening across the northwest of England. Alongside that, the other sort of common theme throughout my career has been being on duty roles. So I picked up my first on-call 24/7 rostered duty. So I was an assistant flood warning duty officer, and again, if you work in hydrology, like the weather happens all day, every day, and you might get involved in quite exciting things. So quite near the front line, I would say, of dealing with flood events, actually typing the flood warnings into the systems that went out to thousands of people when flooding was forecast, making sure all the data was coming in from all the gauging station network across the northwest of England, briefing internally in the Environment Agency and dealing with requests from the public. And again, I think we've all talked a bit about how big natural events have had an impact on us, and talking to people who had water just about to or just had entering their property and talking them through how they could protect their belongings and their most precious things really hammered home to me kind of how terrible flooding can be. Then I moved onwards and upwards into like a technical specialist role. So again, really interesting. So I was developing real-time forecasting models where I really started focusing around that was forecasting for operational actions. So where we needed to deploy demountable defences, use things like the picture, which is a flood scheme at Garstang, how we got the lead time to get people out to where they needed to be to operate those defences and put them in place in the right place in time. Took me down a route of getting into probabilistic forecasting, which again is a really interesting part of the kind of hydrology work, and really rewarding in terms of the number of actions that have been taken off the back of that work that I started back then. I moved from flood warning into flood forecasting duty, so actually monitoring the models that were running the flood forecast, communicating those flood forecasts to the people who were issuing the warnings and briefing people, and scheduling flood forecasts so that we kept an eye on how the situation was developing, like I say, across the northwest of England. That was quite a kind of flashy environment, so we needed to be on the case all day, every day for that one. Then I moved, it must have been 2009, I guess, to the Flood Forecasting Centre. So I helped with the setting up of the Flood Forecasting Centre it was in London at the time, working with the Met Office. So really exciting to be in there at the beginning, working out how we work together. Believe it or not, on day one, we had very, very little in the way of tools, processes and guidance, and we were kind of winging it for the first year or two. So getting all that set up, I actually issued the first operational flood guidance statement, not as any sort of honour, but just because of the timing of the shifts. So that was pretty exciting to get that out and kind of working through. And again, we've kind of talked about this before, but it's exciting to be able to work on that interface between the kind of meteorologists and the hydrologists, and dealing with the professional partners as well. So really good, working 24/7 shifts and applying our kind of meteorological and hydrological knowledge in real time. So after my stint at the Flood Forecasting Centre, I came back to the Environment Agency, I guess off the back of the work I'd been doing around probabilistic forecasting. I'd become very interested in the coastal side of things, and I kind of moved my specialism. And again, this is one of the great things about hydrology. It's such a wide field, and a lot of the kind of concepts and the approaches we take are kind of transferable to different aspects. So I moved my kind of focus from what was previously pretty much kind of 80–90% fluvial forecasting and mapping into coastal flood modelling, mapping and forecasting. Got really interested in kind of different joint probability methods. How do we work out how likely it is to have a big tide and big waves and strong winds all at the same time? How do we get where we've got fluvial tidal interactions at the same time? And got involved in helping with scheme designs of some of the big flood schemes that went in to protect the coast around the northwest of England again. At the same time as I was doing that, I took on a role which was the monitoring and forecasting duty officer. So taking a lead for the flood forecast in the morning for northwest England, so feeding into the flood guidance statement, making the decisions which led to the issuing of warnings. So you'd make a recommendation of how high you thought the river would get and whether it was going to exceed flood warning thresholds, and make sure that the people who are issuing those warnings were ready to go when the messages came out, and communicating the flood forecasts internally within the Environment Agency, but also when needed with partners to make sure they kind of understood how the weather and the hydrological picture was developing. And some of my most exciting times have been in really big flood events where you're making literally hundreds of flood forecasts throughout the night, and dozens of flood warnings are going out. And although that's quite terrible for the individuals and the communities and businesses that are impacted, there's a real opportunity to have a real sense of pride in terms of giving people as much warning, as much notice as you can, so they can sort of minimize the impacts, and also kind of destruction testing all your work that has gone on in years before in terms of developing the models, gathering all the information, and doing all the work beforehand. So really exciting place to be. So soon after that, I kind of moved into leadership roles, and again, I guess as for early career kind of hydrologists, I think it's important to kind of flag to you, you don't always have to do technical stuff, and being in hydrology offers you a really good opportunity to have a wide understanding of a lot of concepts which you can apply to other things. So I moved into managing the flood modelling and flood forecasting teams for the northwest of England. So we were delivering all the flooding services, flood mapping, flood warning, flood scheme design for over 5 million people, bringing together, so this is, you know, again, a common theme within hydrology, kind of a lot of things are quite similar. So flood modelling for sort of longer term risk and flood forecasting are actually quite similar kind of ways of looking at slightly different problems. So you can bring people together and do that, and that's been a really this was a really great time to kind of bring on over a large geographical area how we were doing things. At the same sort of time as that, so I became what we call one of the national flood forecasting duty managers. So rather than just working within a kind of regional patch, I was leading on flood forecasting for the whole of England. So working closely with the flood forecasting centre, making sure the whole organisation was at operational readiness and able to respond to flooding, and that all our partners were getting the right kind of messages and consistent messages and knew what to do. And importantly, we were briefing the managers who were attending COBRA, which is the Cabinet Office briefing room, which is where, you know, the very top levels of government come together in times of national emergency. Then bear with me because I'm nearly there, guys, and I'm going at a bit of a canter, but again, then I moved into an even more strategic role, so modelling, mapping and data manager. So I started working with the team that was setting the strategy for all flood modelling within the Environment Agency. I led on two big projects. I'll take them back to front. So I was a project executive on updating the National Risk Register. That's been in the news a fair bit with COVID. That sets out the risks to the entire country, and I was updating the kind of second highest risk on the register after pandemic flu, which was the risk due to flooding from river, sea, surface water. So that's used every single day to assess the risks to the country at a very, very high level. And I was also leading on updating the flood, the risk of flooding from rivers and sea for the whole of England as well. So really great opportunity to get involved in some really big scale projects. And again, your hydrology career journey can take you to places from working on, you know, very small flood risk assessments all the way up to working across the whole country very easily. So if you're interested in that, there's plenty of places you can go. Again, keeping the same roles. And then probably about 3 or 4 years ago, again, hydrology gave me and we talked about moving around, but it gave me the opportunity to move. I've always loved Scotland, and I've had half my eye on moving up here, and a job became available within SEPA, so I moved across to run the flood forecasting and warning team. So running the Scottish Flood Forecasting Service with the Met Office, setting the strategy for how we were going to do flood forecasting and warning across Scotland, delivering improvements to all the flood forecasting tools and services and products, and managing the team. And as a part of that role, I'm also a flood duty manager, so ensuring the whole flood warning service in Scotland works, making sure we've got a strategic kind of overview of flooding and warning, briefing the Scottish Government Office Resilience Room, which is the equivalent to COBRA in Scotland, and also importantly leading on media and comms. So if you're up in Scotland, I apologise if you're listening to me while you're having your shreddies, but we'll be on whenever there's any flooding forecast or likely, kind of pumping out the messages to the public and to the media so that everybody knows that there's coming. And you know, even today on a lovely sunny day in Scotland, we're pushing out a lot of messages around thunderstorms that are due tomorrow. And then finally, in terms of me, I guess I've moved into managing the hydrometry unit in Scotland. So, you know, really critical, and you'll find this throughout your career as well, the data that underpins all of our decisions and making sure that's really high quality is what I get up and do every day today. And I'm really privileged to be able to do that. So I'll just finish for literally 1 minute. Just telling you about some innovations we've got coming in hydrometry in Scotland. So the main thing, or the biggest deal, I think, is we're going to be releasing what we call an API, application programming interface, which you'll be able to access all the SEPA's hydrometric data via later this year. So that will be both real-time data and historical data, which will be great for everyone to develop their models, their new tools, their new products, understand their flood risk, all that stuff. We're working hard on new ways of measuring different things. So the middle top graphic is an ADCP survey where we've been looking at flows and depths using ADCPs and helping inform understanding about fish migration actually. So sort of side kind of bit to the flooding work. The middle bottom is image velocimetry, which is measuring the surface flows using cameras. So a really interesting new technique that we're kind of trying to bring into operational use, which will really reduce the risk of sending people out to site and flood conditions, hopefully. And then the one on the right shows at the top there's this thing called a cable fox. So we're looking at how we can deploy equipment in the rivers safely. So there's quite a lot going on there, and I guess I finish on those just, you know, to say everything's, you know, always developing and innovative, and we're trying to always find new ways of doing things better, quicker, safer, and get the information that underpins all of the hydrology journey. So I think I'll stop there. Hopefully that's given you some food for thought, and I guess if I was gonna sum up one thing for hydrologists, I would say our job is to imagine the unimaginable. So there'll always be a bigger flood, there'll always be a lower flow, it'll always be, you know, more extreme at one end or the other, and I think as hydrologists we need to be, you know, ready for that and getting that message out. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. If you have questions for Mark, please say them relatively briefly now, please. We are quite a bit behind at this point. Mark, with a 10-second answer, I'll ask you one question, please. Because you've detailed a brilliant career and up to this point. It's been fascinating to get an insight into it. Thank you. What would you say has been the biggest change that you have seen within this discipline, within the hydrological discipline, over the time that you've been working within it?
Yeah, I think the focus on kind of the emergency now and emergency situations, like we really are challenged with the way the weather and the climate is changing, and the focus we need to put now, less on kind of long-term change, less on like strategic stuff, although that's all important, but it's kind of protecting people and saving lives, you know, immediately, and managing that is the big change, I think, for me.